James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I nearly wrote a book about trolls once. I can't remember whether I ever told you this. I was approached some years ago to do it when there was still a sort of novelty value attached to people who seem to spend their entire lives on social media, desperately trying to attract the attention or get under the skin of people that they were unlikely ever to meet in real life. And it started off being weird, and then it became slightly troubling, and then it became funny, and then it, just as things often do, became a little bit meh. You just sort of had a curious mixture of, God, these poor old souls, and then possibly a sense of relief that every minute they spent trying to insult you online, they weren't actually inflicting their vile personalities on their family. But I didn't write it because I didn't think it'd be interesting to anybody else. Something's changed since then. Because, of course, what we once called trolling has moved into whole new territories. The idea of pursuing personal vendettas against personal individuals because you didn't like them or you hated the fact that they were constantly proved right about Brexit changed, for me at least, immeasurably during the pandemic, when trolling sort of transmuted or transmogrified into a sort of weaponised dissemination of conspiracy theories, coupled with vile ad hominem and ad feminem attacks on journalists and public figures who were interested only really in reporting the truth. But if you're a conspiracy theorist, the thing you hate most in the world is the truth. And Mariana Spring has written a superb book about that process. It's called Among the Trolls, My Journey Through Conspiracy Land. You'll know Mariana through her work as a disinformation and social media correspondent, indeed the country's first. And indeed, there is an arresting line, which we'll start with. My name is Mariana Spring, and some of my trolls say they want to kill me, which conflates the two worlds I've just described, Mariana. The difference between people just taking against you for various odd reasons because you're on the telly or on the radio, and people taking against you because you insist on shining lights into the darkness where they dwell.
Yeah, I think, I investigate a very particular social media world, one that is infected with disinformation, hate, conspiracy theories, and I look at polarisation and algorithms too. And lots of that has made me very much a kind of lightning rod for a certain type of committed, I often refer to them as conspiracy theory activists almost. Part of targeting me is part of pushing a particular narrative or attempting to kind of undermine me and the journalism I do. And in the book, I spend a lot of my time going out and meeting all kinds of different people who have become caught up in this, whether it's the people harmed or the trolls themselves, the conspiracy theorists, and also obviously holding the social media companies to account, because that's what this is sort of all about.
Where did your interest begin on a personal level? Because presumably it was before it kicked in on a professional level.
It was. I was at university in 2016 when the US the US election was happening, and it was at that time there were loads of allegations about foreign influence operations, Russia, and I became really interested in particularly the way that social media can affect our democratic processes, or how social media affects, I think, the fabric of our society. And the journalism I do, I hope, goes kind of beyond tech journalism in that traditional way, but actually looking at the kind of sociology of this all, like how does it affect the way our world works? And so when I started, around the time I started doing this job, we had, the 2019 election. We obviously had the pandemic, which resulted in this huge proliferation of conspiracy theories and disinformation. And so for me, I think it really started there. I thought, oh, hang on a second, this thing I've grown up with is now affecting the fabric of our societies, really.
We did something during lockdown that I thought we probably learned from you, actually, which was I didn't want to open up the phone lines to people telling me that Bill Gates was trying to inject a microchip into my bloodstream that would track all of my purchases and give him, I forget the details.
It's quite hard to remember.
Well, that's one of the points you make powerfully, is that they sort of leach into each other, don't they, these conspiracy theories? But what we discovered was that by speaking to people who loved the people who believed that Bill Gates was trying to inject microchips into our bloodstream, you got a much clearer picture and a much more poignant picture of what's going on than you would do simply by talking to the victims of the conspiracy.
Yeah, and I think it's important sometimes, and I do this in the book, to separate between the true believers, so to speak, and then the people who are perhaps more cynical, the non-believers, although I put a question mark at the end of that, because there are people who, can make money out of this, they grow their followings, they feel powerful, important, And then there are their devoted followers, who are often people who genuinely believe the most extreme conspiracy theories. And here we're not talking about legitimate concerns and questions people can have. We're talking about people who believe almost everything is a hoax or that it's staged. The problem when they fall down that rabbit hole is that they become increasingly isolated, and for the people close to them, it's really hard to sort of help them get back out of that rabbit hole and to help them, they have an entirely new worldview, belief system.
And it's everywhere. This is socio-economically speaking. Everyone will know someone, at least, or possibly know someone who knows someone who's caught up in this stuff. Middle-class dinner parties, everywhere there'll be someone who says something about vaccines or something about 15-minute cities or something about new world orders or something about the WEF, the World Economic Forum. I mean, it is absolutely extraordinary how it has reached parts that previous generations of conspiracy theories, you look at David Icke a bit in the book, he's the name I would have reached for 10 years ago, probably alone, actually. I probably wouldn't have been able to reach for any others. That now that they gloss over and they blend into each other and they're everywhere. Yeah,
you almost have to have a dictionary of conspiracy theory sort of language. You have to learn to speak it, and I talk about that a bit at the start of the book. But, anyone and everyone can be affected by this, and I think we all like to think in some ways that we're immune to it, but almost everybody I speak to knows someone, maybe it's a next door neighbour, a colleague, a friend, a family member, who's really fallen into this stuff, there are lots of stereotypes, perhaps misconceptions we have about people who believe conspiracy theories, this idea that they are stupid or mad. And actually what I've found on the whole is that they're not those things. They're curious, engaged, hyper-engaged on social media and deeply distrustful.
And also dedicated to the idea that they are trying to save the rest of us from specified and sometimes unspecified ills. So that there is an almost a warped altruism in play here.
Yeah, I was at a conspiracy theory rally in Totnes in the southwest of the UK, and I met this woman called Natalie, and she was one of the people who I would class as a true believer, and she genuinely was convinced that her family were going to be killed and controlled by these overlords who were carrying out this unspecified plan. And in the middle of our conversation, she burst into tears. And for me, that really kind of signified how deeply she believed this stuff, and how there are some people who are so far down this rabbit hole, they're terrified. And I think that's something we should all be really worried about, because they don't trust anything anymore.
As journalists, it's odd, isn't it, when people in your own social circle start talking about mainstream media or talking about false flag operations or claiming that even wars are not unfolding in the way that they're being represented on the BBC or Channel 4. And you have to say, well, that these are my friends and colleagues that you're talking about. If there is a conspiracy going on here, then you do realise that I am part of it. And they kind of don't know where to go on that point.
That's what's difficult, is often, when you present people with the evidence, if you turn around and say, well, I know this person, they've been there, they've seen it with their own eyes, this is true. That doesn't convince them, and they move on to saying something else. And that's why I often focus on that question of why rather than what. I think sometimes when you get kind of caught up in the what someone believes, you don't really get very far. Whereas if you start to quiz why they have become so distrustful, often legitimate concerns, fears, they feel let down, they feel as though they just can't trust anything anymore. That's when you start to be able to uncover, I think, a lot more about how this all works and the way social media is affecting them as well.
And this is where you're particularly powerful on the threat that this poses to democracy itself, because an uninformed vote is not really a proper vote at all, or a misinformed vote, or a vote born of conspiracy theory is a threat to what we understand democracy to mean.
Yeah, a lot of the people I meet who are very deep into what I call conspiracy land in the book are people who almost position themselves totally outside of the political system. They feel very politically homeless, and they just do not trust or believe in the system. And there's one point where I'm talking to the editor of a conspiracy theory newspaper, and he says to me, oh, wouldn't it be great if we just kind of got rid of all of the institutions and everything, and we just sort of cracked on and did our own thing? And I said, well, that's kind of like the systems we yes. rely on. And there are, absolutely people raise legitimate examples of corruption, wrongdoing, bad stuff that happens. But if people no longer believe or trust in the systems that we rely on for society to work, we're in quite a tricky place. Do
you have a magic bullet? A lot of people listening will be wondering what to do if you encounter someone, because you mentioned presenting Natalie with lots and lots of evidence, and you will either burst into tears, move along, or I suppose in the worst case scenario, sort of attack you, which, you detail the statistics of the social media posts targeting you personally, you specifically in the book, and it's chilling. Even by my standards, these numbers are extraordinary. But do you have a get out of jail free card? Do you have something you do to move the conversation to healthier places?
I think there isn't necessarily a super straightforward solution. I think there is some really good advice that I've kind of gathered from speaking to people who've managed to leave these conspiracy theory movements, also from expert psychologists, and all of them say, don't give up, keep having those conversations, be patient. Ask that question of why, try and identify the legitimate concerns,
Always.
Untangle them,
yes.
And that can often help. And
why do they want to kill your children? Why do they want to take over the world? Why does Bill Gates want to track?
What are you worried about?
Why do they want to do it? Cui bono?
Yeah, and I think often, people they believe kind of huge levels of competence, that so many people are in on these plans and plots, that there are no whistleblowers, all of these things that just would be incredibly hard, superhuman to pull off, and that are far beyond real examples of bad stuff that happens. So I think just by engaging in those conversations and not giving up, and it's why I keep doing the journalism I do, because I think it's so important that we don't just dismiss this stuff, but actually we take it seriously and apply the same investigative approach we have to journalism for years to other areas to this.
What was the most unpleasant character, going by record, that you sought to get a face-to-face with while doing the book? Or potentially dangerous. I mean, I don't ignore my adjectives.
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, in the chapter where I talk about the people who are actually spreading this stuff, there are a couple of encounters. One with a conspiracy theory newspaper editor who I agreed could interview me as well, because I'm really happy for people to ask me questions. And that was an almost 4-hour-long interview back and forth, and that was very revealing, I think, more so in just like how the dynamics played out than necessarily what was said. There's also a conspiracy theorist who has tracked down Manchester Arena survivors of the bombing.
Yes, this is terrible.
Yeah, and I confronted him at a market stall he ran, where he later admitted to having spied on one of the survivors who has been left severely disabled after the attack, a young woman, but refused to answer any of my questions. And that, I was really struck by. For me, it felt like the first time this person had ever been confronted with the reality and the harm of what he'd done. And I think that's important here. This book, I hope, is me going out and investigating on behalf of members of the public who have had horrible things happen to them on social media, conspiracy theories, hate, really, really nasty stuff, and they feel as though no one's listening to them. Social media companies, policymakers, and without reporters doing the work I do, I don't think anyone would know necessarily what's happening to them.
A word, if you would, to move into shallower waters, on the Kate Middleton photograph that's doing the rounds at the moment, could almost have been timed to perfection for the publication of Among the Trolls, My Journey Through Conspiracy Land, because some of the conspiracies, and I don't even look for them, but they've managed to cross my desk, are quite extraordinary. Is this a good example of some of the trends you describe in the book?
It really is, and I think there's a blueprint here that I've become really used to, but actually seeing it play out in a different context is important, which is there's a perceived vacuum of information. People knew that the Princess of Wales wasn't going to be seen in public, but still they've got questions, genuine questions about what's going on. They want details. People then start posting. They want to know more. They they analyse every single thing that comes their way. Then there is this actual example of an edited photograph. It further fuels the really extreme conspiracy theories.
If they can do that, then they must be doing that.
The amateur sleuths are on it. I'm sure lots of people have seen the videos of people unpicking every single thing. It does have an impact as well. I mean, some of the content is very satirical, but some of it is, it's about trust in again here, the sort of royal family, and there's real people at the centre of this as well, and they're kind of at the heart of this storm. So it's I feel like my trolls would like to say maybe I've secretly edited the photograph.
That'd be nice. That'd be great publicity.
Book, but that's not the case.
A few texts. You in the mood for this?
Oh, yeah, OK, go
Ready?
for it.
You could probably end them if I give you the... SAS Andy tells us there's no such thing as COVID vaccines. VM tells us that he doesn't believe in conspiracy theories, but he does think that the lies in the national press and even on the BBC lead people towards conspiracy theories. Mate, that means you believe in conspiracy theories. And this one says, hi, James, do the Rothschilds and the Freemasons exist? ? Hashtag Zinger. I added the hashtag Zinger on that one. So... Can we put, final question, can we put a scale on it? I mean, do we have any idea of what percentage of the population is susceptible to or already enthralled to this sort of nonsense?
It's quite hard to quantify in that way. And you know, I think it's fair to say, certainly from the journalism I've done and the kind of first-hand encounters, that there's it's very much a minority of people who really believe this stuff, but it's a committed minority. And you know, most people won't be totally deep down the rabbit hole, as we call it, kind of into conspiracy theories, to the point where they genuinely believe terror attacks have been staged or wars have been staged or that the pandemic never really happened. But a lot of us, I think, can be vulnerable to anything that plays into our existing biases and views, particularly because of how social media works, right? You know, we're constantly recommended stuff that we probably agree with or will react to. And I think that the most important thing for all of us, particularly in this massive election year, is to be able to step back and say, oh, hang on a second, why am I being recommended this? What is it doing? And I think as well, and I say this a lot, but thinking about social media and the impact it has, you know, last year, and not a single social media boss, exec, anybody would do an interview with me.
Really?
Social media companies are, in my view, as powerful, if not more powerful, than many governments.
They are.
If a cabinet minister wasn't doing interviews, we'd be kind of outraged. And so I think that we should all be thinking about, you know, the conspiracy theorists who target me would like to say that I'm, I don't know, a mouthpiece for X, Y, or Z, when actually I'm trying to hold to account some of the biggest and most powerful companies and very rich companies that are affecting how all of us live our lives.
On accountability. Mariana Spring, actually, Dave just wants to know quickly, are you aware of the one that says that spectacles, as in glasses, are a sham because you can heal your own eyes?
I'm not actually aware of that one.
You see, there you go. There you go. Quick heads up from Dave. Among the Trolls, My Journey Through Conspiracy Land by Mariana Spring is out now. And, well, as you can tell just from that brief exchange, it's absolutely extraordinary and something which, simply by dint of listening to a radio programme like this, you will already have demonstrated a particular interest in. Mariana, good luck with the book. Many thanks for your time.